Welcome to the Phoenix Project. I'm your host, Jennifer Chandler. The following episode contains discussions of domestic abuse, coercive control, PTSD, suicide attempts, chronic illness, and trauma. Listener discretion is advised. If you're currently struggling or in crisis, please contact emergency services in your area or reach out to a crisis support line for immediate assistance. Welcome back. Today we're discussing a topic that is often overlooked in conversations about domestic abuse, post-separation abuse. Many people believe that leaving an abusive relationship is the end of the abuse. But for many survivors, leaving is not the end. It's the beginning of a different battle. Joining me today is Sarah Danette, a survivor who is courageously sharing her experience of navigating PTSD, financial abuse, chronic illness, parenting, and recovery after leaving a 9-year marriage. Sarah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, I'm honored. Sarah, for listeners meeting you for the first time, can you tell us a little about yourself and where you are in your journey today?
Absolutely. I'm a single mum to a 9-year-old boy. I'm also a university student. I'm just finishing up my degree. And I was married at 19 to who I thought was the love of my life. I had my son shortly afterwards, but I had just applied for the final order on my divorce.
No, I'm sorry to hear that. It sounds like you're going through a lot at the moment. Before we talk about what happened after you left, what would you like listeners to understand about the relationship itself?
He was my best friend, which is really strange because of the context of this podcast. But I built a life with him. I laughed with him. I had a child with him. And I have a lot of cognitive dissonance about the marriage, and about him because of what happened within the marriage. It was so
Mm-hmm.
subtle. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm still trying to reconcile pieces and put them together and sort of retraining my brain to see things for how it was. But it was where I survived and where I learned what love really meant.
Right. Looking back now, were there warning signs that you didn't recognize at the time?
There was 100%. In the first year of our relationship, there was a lot of love bombing and words of affirmation. And at first I thought, oh my goodness, this is my person. He loves me. He sees me. And, he'd buy me gifts and he would tell me I was the only one he wanted. And then after a year, we had gotten married and we moved out to Germany together with the army. And once I was isolated, he began to make me feel really bad about myself, my appearance, so much so that I developed an eating disorder to cope and just be good enough for him. That was always in my head, just keep making yourself ill and to be good enough. And then he began tearing my character down to others. He told his whole regiment that I had cheated on him,
Hmm.
which was not true and extremely shocking to discover. The early days were mostly about degradation. There was even an instance when I was giving birth that he raised a fist to me for squeezing his hand too hard. And I don't think at the time I really absorbed what had just happened. It wasn't until years later that I really was like, okay, that was a problem, actually. But I was obviously in a lot of pain and on a lot of drugs. So,
Right. You were a
and
little
then
preoccupied having a child. Oh my
exactly,
goodness.
exactly. I was 19. I was terrified,
Wow.
you know. And then the kind of gaslighting began, and he began making me reliant on him. There were so many instances, and I could talk all day about them. But what I know now is that somebody who is safe and loves you wouldn't want to hurt you or make you feel awful about yourself or make you feel like you can't trust anything but magpies and signs. just to stay safe or remind you constantly that you own nothing and have no agency. But I think I rationalized it in my head because I grew up being abused, and love meant pain, and pain was safety. I knew what to expect, and that I just held on to that, and it kept me trapped.
Wow. What ultimately led you to leave?
It was after the first 7 years, and I had discovered his porn addiction and went to therapy because I was struggling with what I thought was betrayal trauma, but what I know now was PTSD. And my therapist helped me to understand what was happening to me, but the knowledge didn't protect me. He gaslit me about it so badly that I would disassociate for days at a time. So I gave him the ultimatum. I said, "You need to get help or I will leave," which followed 2 years of me waiting and begging and pleading and trying to give him endless empathy and energy and help him in his journey. But he pretended to go to therapy and he tried to make me feel sorry for him. But at the same time, I was getting stronger and stronger. And I realized that this man in front of me actually knew exactly what he was doing. And it wasn't until I went to America last of May, so May of 2025, that I had that moment of, okay, I need to leave now. I've done everything I can. And I was sat in an airport in Boston and I was scared to come home. I ended my marriage a few weeks later and I decided that no one was ever going to make me feel scared to come home again.
That's a powerful realization. And
It
that's,
was.
in some of the previous episodes in the beginning, I talked about the whisper that kept me alive. And it's
Mhm.
the same thing. It's that whisper in your head that
Yeah.
says, nope, this is the last time and
Yeah.
it's never going to happen again. Many people believe leaving ends the abuse. What was your experience?
At the time, I didn't actually realize how bad the abuse was. Obviously, my brain had put aside stuff, and only knew what was happening in the kind of immediate couple of years before. And everything kind of operated the same way. And he would come over and he would cook and he would clean and he would take care of our son. And he he was just like he was. And then he found out I was seeing somebody. And it wasn't long after we split up. But of course, you leave the marriage mentally before you leave it physically. So I had already moved on. I'd already
Mhm.
fallen out of love and moved on. But he became incredibly cold and it was terrifying. And I'd seen glimpses of this coldness before, but it was it's incredibly hard to describe. But you kind of know that, okay, this is not the same now. We need to start protecting ourselves more. This is real. And
Mhm.
everything stopped being civil when I felt like I had to become somebody he never loved and he hated me overnight. Or he stopped pretending. He didn't. That's when he started triggering the PTSD symptoms. Even
Mhm.
though I'd repeatedly beg him and plead with him to stop. But of course, he knew exactly what he was doing.
Of course. Well, that kind of answers my next question. When did you realize the abuse was still happening?
Yeah, sure. And I knew that he was intentionally triggering the PTSD, but I didn't know it was abuse at that time.
Mhm.
And it sounds ridiculous, but it was while I was talking on ChatGPT. I didn't have anyone really that can understand the situation, and I couldn't afford therapy at that time. So of course, I just left the marriage. I needed to, prepare for the next kind of chapter.
Mhm.
Um, so I used AI to kind of have somebody to talk to, and it was when I'd written down the history and what was happening after the separation, and it used the words coercive control. And I googled the definition. And I realized that this man that I had been married to for 9 years was somebody, I was never safe with. And I everything just changed for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Exactly.
How was the post-separation abuse different?
During the marriage, the abuse was incredibly covert and silent. It took me 7 years to actually realize what was happening. And it wasn't until the porn addiction and I started taking care of myself. And I was like, I've been giving a lot of energy to this man and he's been doing this behind my back. And then I started like looking inwards and realized what was happening. And he hid his control behind what he told me was love. He'd never screamed at me. He'd only hurt me physically a few times and had never overtly put me down. Everything bad he ever did was followed by what I thought was accountability and apologies. And then there would be a love bombing cycle. And I thought, oh, great, everything's getting better. But this was different. The separation was different because he didn't pretend to care about the impact anymore.
Mm.
And he completely ignored me when I pleaded with him. Even after I tried to end my life and I said, look, it didn't work, but this is how it got. This is where it got. I need you to stop. But he still continued and he made me feel crazy. And it was crazier than I ever felt before. And there was no accountability. It was completely over gaslighting and dismissal.
That's what they do. They make you think that you're going crazy, literally.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
you begin to question yourself, your own sanity.
Mm-hmm.
Am I going crazy? Did this really happen this way?
Yeah.
But that whisper is still there telling you, no, you deserve more. You experienced severe PTSD symptoms after leaving. What did daily life look like?
It was as though, when you're a kid and you sneak downstairs and watch a horror film or at a
Mm-hmm.
sleepover or something like that, and you feel like, you'll be walking up the stairs off to bed and you feel like something in the dark is there and it's scaring you and you run, you get that feeling in your chest of, I need to get up these stairs and get under my duvet and I'll be safe. It was like that. It was all day, every single day. Like I was being chased or hunted by something I couldn't see and I didn't completely understand. And I didn't sleep because of the nightmares and feeling like I needed to keep on my guard. I'd be sat there and I would hear cars and I would flinch and I would check out the window and make sure he wasn't there. And I couldn't leave my house because I was terrified of something reminding me of the abuse and triggering me even deeper. But it was also, he was living in the same town, so I didn't want to run into him. So I was terrified to go out. And my heart raced constantly and I couldn't breathe 24/7. And my hair began falling out in clumps and I lost so much weight. It was it was true psychological torture, and I had no idea what I had done to deserve it.
You know, I hear you saying going through all of that. We all have what's called a window of tolerance after we experience trauma.
Mhm,
And when you're above your window of tolerance, you're in a hyperarousal state. And that's kind of, the body stores trauma. It
mhm,
reacts to trauma. Every cell in our body reacts. And your body is still, your nervous system is still in that hypervigilant state. That's why you flinch. That's
mhm.
why, you're looking, over your shoulder every chance you get. I would suggest some like somatic breath work or
Mm.
even EMDR is a great therapy avenue for trauma. What impact do you think it had on your sense of safety? I mean, I think you kind of answered that, but you can expand on that.
Yeah, there wasn't such a thing as stability every day. It was just survive, just get to the end of the day, just take care of the child, And I had installed a camera outside of my house, and even had my locks changed, and I was paranoid and spent the days just waiting for him to kill me. And it's not like rationally in my head, I knew that most of the abuse was psychological and it was emotional. So I knew rationally in my frontal lobe, I knew that he wasn't about to burst through the door and kill me. But it's still something told me that I needed to be prepared anyway. And, I started drinking really heavily whenever I didn't have my son, and I couldn't escape it because I had to have contact with him. He even told me it was my fault, basically, because I had been on the phone to my partner at the time, and that's when I was kind of like, okay, I'm being punished. And it made me feel like he is very good at making me feel like it is my fault
But I hope you know that it's not.
in my frontal lobe.
And even if you don't believe it yet, you need to tell yourself it's not my fault. I
Hmm.
did not do anything to deserve this. He is the broken one. You are not broken. You may feel like you're broken,
Yeah.
but you still have that fighting spirit and that whisper inside you that told you to
Hmm.
leave, that told you to get out. And every hard day that you've had so far, you've conquered, and you will
Very true.
continue to conquer. It's baby steps. I had another conversation with someone, and healing is not linear. It's 2
Mm,
steps forward, 1 step back, and you'll have good
absolutely.
days and bad days. People often assume survivors start healing after leaving. How did your experience challenge that?
I think that you don't start healing until they let you. You survive until they allow you to live, it feels like. And it felt like I was never going to get better because he wasn't going to let me. And sometimes I still feel that way. I've been out a year and I still feel that way. But my therapist at the time, she even said to me, she said, I can't help you heal the burns until you're out of the fire. And every day I was in the fire, every second of every day, from the moment I went to sleep until the minute I woke up. Like, it was 24 hours. And for me, the abuse, well, the severe abuse, the severe lengths that he went to only stopped a few months ago, not when I actually left. So I feel
Mhm.
like I've only really just begun healing, and I see it every day when my body starts to feel a bit safer and memories start to come up. And I'm like, I haven't thought about that in years, or I forgot that happened, but my body and my nervous system is beginning to feel safe. So it's sort of going, you're safe to feel this. It's safe to
Yes,
feel this now. But you have to get out of the fire first.
absolutely. That's the hardest part. You mentioned reaching a point where the ongoing trauma contributed to a suicide attempt. Looking back, what do you wish people understood?
I wish people understood that what we're feeling is very real. And these abusers train our nervous systems to know their behaviors and their patterns and their cycles and their looks and their breath and everything about them. We know them better than anybody else in their world. And the trauma that comes from that is completely life altering. Our mind is changed, and even the shape of our brain and its chemistry is changed by what we go through. And our whole purpose in life becomes to survive them. And they know this. They know how to manipulate the pain they've caused. And we don't come out the same person that went into that situation. We come out almost primitive, and our basic biology has taken over. And that lizard brain that helped us survive lions thousands of years ago, that's the one that's running the show.
Mhm.
And
That's a good way to put it.
exactly. When And until we can rewire what was done to us and allow our frontal lobes to take back the reins, we are going to be terrified and we are going to be cautious. We will
Mhm.
flinch and cry and scream and whatever.
Exactly.
we will be confused and not be able to trust ourselves and go, well, hang on a minute. No, he said that, but then I felt this. Wait, that doesn't match up.
Mm-hmm.
We will question ourselves over and over again, and we will need to keep talking about it until we can actually reconcile what happened.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And until we begin to do that, sometimes, unfortunately, people fall back into having to learn the same lesson over again by repeating the same pattern. They end up in
Yeah.
another abusive relationship, another,
Hmm.
situation of coercive control. And,
Yeah.
that's when it's so important to recognize the signs, why we have these conversations,
Hmm.
so that we can be aware and, begin to heal. And I think as women, we don't lift each other up enough. And,
No,
that's part of my goal with this podcast is to lift other women up. We're
that's beautiful.
strong. Look at what we have survived, you know?
We are, absolutely.
So, Sarah, you also live with fibromyalgia. How did the trauma affect your physical health?
The post-separation abuse during that time, it was sort of just survive, just get through the day. And my body, I appreciate it a lot. It acted accordingly. We worked together to keep going. I'm laughing about it because that's how I cope.
Mm-hmm.
But my, my fibromyalgia didn't cause me any pain or fatigue, and my body began to shut off resources like to my hair, and that's why it was coming out in clumps. And it was just a focus on keeping itself alive, because I wasn't eating enough and I was running on cortisol constantly. I was stressed constantly. I was ready to fight constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And my mind just repeated itself over and over again. It's just survive, just survive. And I also ended up with horrific acne all over my nose. And it's something I've never struggled with before. And I looked like a burn victim. I looked terrifying
Oh.
when I had it. And I would tell my partner and that I felt like my body was shutting down. It's just
Mm.
giving up. And I honestly was kind of worried about what kind of health condition I would have as a result of this because of the way my body was reacting to it.
Yeah.
And I became a complete shell of myself. And as well, I had a flare up of what I know now to be postural hypertension, which is an autonomic nervous system disorder where you can't regulate your blood pressure. So you just stand up and faint.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I was fainting and I was dealing with symptoms from that as well. And it was exhausting.
That leads me to my next question. What was it like managing PTSD and a chronic illness simultaneously?
It was, my recovery really didn't start until earlier this year, around February. And my body knew this. And as soon as the severe abuse stopped and I felt somewhat safe for the first time in, I think it was about 8 months, I had a massive flare up of my fibromyalgia, which is ongoing. And managing the PTSD alongside that is difficult because I feel like I'm so emotionally exhausted all the time that I only have energy for one, and it's hard to balance which one I deal with. And then I sit there and think, no, if I don't cry this out, if I don't scream to a pillow, this is going to make this worse. And it's that mental load of trying to figure out, okay, what do we conquer next, sort of thing.
Have you ever heard of the spoon theory?
I have, yes.
So for people who don't know, I'll explain it because I too have fibromyalgia. And it's like throughout your day, everything you have, a collection of spoons, and everything you do costs you a certain amount of spoons. Taking a shower might be 5 spoons. Making breakfast might be 10 spoons. So you have to decide every morning how you want to spend your spoons because you only get so many. and all of these things throughout your day take away from your spoons. And some days, you're left with one spoon and you're just exhausted and you can't take on one more thing, So I understand that completely.
Sure.
Do you think society understands the connection between trauma and physical health?
I think I definitely believe that there is a connection. I read the book The Body Keeps the Score, loved it, and
Great
it was
book.
incredibly eye-opening. I developed fibromyalgia 3 years into my marriage, and I was more vulnerable to it because of my family history. My mum has it as well, but she's also an abuse survivor. So,
Mhm.
but myself and my GP believed, that it's not a coincidence that I ended up with a debilitating condition that's triggered by either physical or emotional trauma 3 years into an abusive relationship. And I think it's so misunderstood by society because I don't think people understand the connection between the mind and the body because it's a relatively new concept. But, to me, it's really simple because our body reacts when our mind does. Even looking at, PTSD, when you get triggered, you your body reacts in some way.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think called difficulties, I apologize.
That's okay. I always describe it like this for people who doubt a connection between the mind and the body. If you were having a nightmare, you could wake up kicking, screaming, crying, your heart racing because your body is reacting to something that's going on in your mind. You're not
Absolutely.
physically, in danger. You're laying in your bed. So the connection between the mind and the body is real. And, I've seen it in my own life firsthand. I know it to be very true. I wanted to ask you another question. How did financial abuse continue after the separation?
It was definitely a massive factor in the separation. I left my marriage with nothing, and it was one of the main reasons I didn't leave sooner. I had nothing to my name. Everything was in his name, my car, my phone, and the house we were living in actually belonged to the army, and he was renting it from them, so I had no claims.
Mm.
And I didn't have a career because of my health, the fact that I'd gone back into education at 24 and I couldn't manage working and studying and raising my son was, I think, 5 years old at that time. And then a few months after the separation, he began to pool resources and it started with a subscription to a streaming service. And then it was bills that he said he would cover while we were still living in the married quarter. And then it was controlling how much child support he would give me. And then eventually he took away my car. And this was especially jarring because this car had been bought for me because I couldn't drive what you guys call a stick shift. I couldn't drive a stick. I could only do an automatic because I had ADHD. And he allowed, he also allowed me to keep it post separation. He knew how much I relied on this car, to get myself to uni, to get to work, to get my son to school, into his therapy, and get to my therapy. And because of my chronic pain, it was the center of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So he told me I could keep it until the finance had run out, which it would be next year. But he obviously pulled that away, and it was extremely scary because we had just moved to a rural location as
Mm.
well. And it was, it was, I had nothing, absolutely nothing. And he knew to take away those things that I did have left that he was kindly, quotation marks, kindly allowing me to use. And he didn't care about the impact to my son or myself. And we relied on him financially still. And in some ways, I'm grateful he took away the car because it was the final thing that he could control me with, well, bar my son.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it was extremely, extremely stressful.
And You had mentioned you were also investigated following allegations despite evidence supporting your position. What was that experience like?
Being a suspect in an investigation for a crime I didn't commit was probably the single most terrifying experience of my life. And knowing it was caused by the man that I had given 9 years and a child to was even worse. And I kept going over it in my head because after experiencing so much gaslighting, I wasn't sure I was innocent. And it sounds ridiculous because I could see it in front of me on the phone screen. I knew I was innocent. But at the same time, I couldn't trust my perception. I couldn't trust what I saw right in front of me because it was like what he told me, what he told others, that was law. And I'd spent my days just going over it and over it again and parenting and working and I couldn't get any university work done and I almost lost my degree because of it. And I just kept repeating to myself, like, why did you report the abuse? You should have just kept your mouth shut. You shouldn't have left the marriage. But the worst part was probably having to explain to my son where I was going in the middle of the night and giving him all the love and cuddles that I could because I wasn't sure if I was coming home. And I was so scared I'd lose my child. And I had images in my mind of saying goodbye to my son and not being able to protect him anymore. And it took my breath away. And at the same time, I was having, my son and his dad were having supervised Xbox contact and they were having online sessions and I was supervising it and having to sit there for an hour a week trying to manage and support the relationship between my son and the man that was trying to take me away from my son at the same time. It was horrific and it made me so angry. And all I wanted to do was say, no, you can't talk to him. Look at what you're doing right now. How do you not see this is harming him too? Because I'm more unstable, I'm more exhausted, and I'm more stressed. And obviously, kids see these things. I also knew that my son needed his father. So I kept sitting there and I kept smiling and I kept saying positive things because I'd look at my son and go, he doesn't deserve to lose his dad. Despite what his dad's doing, he doesn't deserve it. He needs his father. And I was in complete survival and I just tried to soak up every second with my child just in case it was the last time, and trying to maintain normality. And I don't think I've ever been as strong as I was in that situation. And thinking back to it still shocks me.
You don't know how strong you are until you have to be.
Absolutely.
How did those interactions with systems and things like that affect your recovery?
It was completely re-traumatizing, being a victim in one investigation and
Mhm.
also, being abused in another as a suspect from, I wasn't protected, even though I had handed in so much evidence to prove the abuse. And I'm talking a diary and messages and even a voice recording of him admitting to gaslighting me. And it stalled my recovery because I was having to relive everything that happened in the coercive control investigation while simultaneously being abused in the other investigation. And I felt like no one was listening to me. And I understand that they have to prove a pattern, but at
Mhm.
the same time, I also had to fight them to collect evidence and listen. And I remember sitting there about to be interviewed as a suspect, crying on the floor, shaking, and saying, I'm terrified of him, and getting absolutely nothing.
Mm,
It was completely horrific.
absolutely. I'm uh what was it like trying to parent while carrying all of this?
It was it was hell, but it was heaven at the same time because my son, spending time with him regulates me. But I never knew if we were going to be okay or not. And I had to pretend everything was fine for my son. And that was the hardest part of it, pretending. And, my son would say things that he blames me for the separation. He blames me for his dad not being around. And I just want to scream at him. It's not me. He did all these things like,
Mm-hmm.
stop. I'm living with somebody who blames me for a situation that I've only tried to protect him in. And of course he's a child. I understand that, but it's traumatizing and
Mm-hmm.
it's extremely difficult to get through each day.
Right. It is because you don't want to badmouth the other parent, even though you want to,
No.
but
Mm,
that's not the right thing to do. And, that's a difficult situation.
absolutely.
How did you protect your son while trying to survive yourself?
I was trying to I was just trying to ensure that he had everything he needs. And I protected him by, not knowing how I was struggling and not allowing that struggle to reach him and, validating his emotions and journaling with him and sending him to therapy and making sure that he was okay. That was my biggest, I have such a
Mm-hmm.
strong, I think all mothers do, but we have such a strong protective instinct.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, just keep the child okay, and then I'm fine. If he's fine, I'm fine.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and when he told me, his dad wasn't feeding him and he was screaming at him and it was scaring him, I acted and, I went to social services and asked for help and stuff. And even though I knew that it was going to have consequences,
Right. You were studying, working, parenting, and surviving trauma. How did you keep going?
I think there's something that happens on a biological level when you and your child go through something like, we have. And you're the only person in the world they have to protect them, and you do whatever is necessary to make sure they're okay. And it's been extremely difficult. My health has suffered massively. There have been times I've, fallen asleep at work or while I was driving, and it was incredibly taxing, but I didn't feel like I had another choice. I didn't have another choice.
Right.
You know, my child needed me to protect him financially and practically as well. Just had to keep going
Were there moments you wanted to give up?
every day, every single day. I wanted to give up, and I still do. But I also know that I've repeated my own history. My mother left an abusive marriage to a soldier, which was my dad. She also has fibromyalgia, and I was the same age as, like, my son was the same age as me when
Mm.
my mother left. And
Mm-hmm.
so I started the separation in the same kind of position as she was, but she couldn't work. Her fibromyalgia is really severe and she couldn't work. And she just went so deep into her grief and her pain that she just gave up on herself. And
Right.
it felt like she gave up on me and my siblings as well. And, we grew up in poverty because of that. And I have a lot of trauma because of those times. And that just keeps me going every day, just knowing where it will go if I don't keep going.
Right. What has surprised you most about your resilience?
I think, I think what surprised me the most was maternal resilience.
Mm.
I've gone through things that would have floored other people, and that's totally fine. And, it happened to my mum. But I survived every single thing that he threw at me, and it makes me feel proud because when I look back at myself 2 years ago when I was terrified of leaving because I didn't think I'd be able to survive without him, I know that not only did I survive and I proved him wrong, but I've also shown who who I was and who I could be without him.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What does healing look like today?
Healing looks like feeling absolutely everything, even things I feel like should be wrong, like remembering good moments and missing them, or grieving through this divorce, or the thoughts of it would have been so much easier to stay. And I've had those so many times, but I allow myself to grieve him and who I was, and I hold space for those feelings, and that's helps me massively, and it's removed any shame from them.
That's great. What would you say to someone experiencing post-separation abuse right now?
I would say I can't tell you when it will end or if it will, but you aren't as powerless as, that person is making you feel. There are people out there who will go balls to the wall to help you. And even if you don't have people, you have yourself, and you've always had yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And you've survived every single thing that they have thrown at you, and every single bad day, and each time you felt like you can't go on anymore, you've survived it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you're tired and you just want to give up, but just think every single day, just say to yourself, just one more day.
Mm-hmm.
I will try for one more day. And when you survive that day, repeat it to yourself again, and repeat it every day until you feel like you don't have to convince yourself anymore.
Absolutely. What do you wish other people understood about post-separation abuse?
I wish that they understood that it's not as simple as to escape as it might seem, and it doesn't end when you do escape. And you get told to put boundaries in place or just ignore them, or you're disbelieved altogether and labeled jealous or pining or crazy. But we wouldn't have chosen what's happening to us, and we have no say in what they do to us, and it doesn't end. It gets worse, and if we don't have the right support, and if we don't have people around us, we are more likely to go back or not survive it, or like you said, to repeat it over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. If there's one message you hope listeners take away from your story, what would it be?
I think it would be to not give up on themselves, and to know that they deserve to be who they are, and they deserve a life without fear, and it's not their fault. There was no right answer. There was nothing they could have done different to make it stop. And I know the people who are experiencing post-separation abuse are probably battling in their minds every day, searching for the right thing to say or do to make it stop. But you can't. Everyone has a choice, and our abusers are choosing to abuse us. So if you're listening and you feel like you can relate, hear me when I tell you that this isn't your fault, and you don't deserve what is happening to you or what has happened to you.
Amen. Very well said. The Phoenix Project is all about turning pain into purpose. How has your experience shaped the person you're becoming today?
For a long time, I thought that love meant pain and surviving was enough, and that it was normal. And navigating everything I had this last year has taught me that resilience doesn't mean struggling. It's continuing even when you feel like you can't. And I'm also learning to trust myself again. And while I was in a relationship, there was a point I completely lost grip on reality, and I couldn't trust anything he said, but also he made sure that I couldn't trust myself either. So I trusted magpies, which sounds ridiculous, but it was something I held on to. And two meant I was safe, and one meant there was something that I needed to be afraid of. That's where I was at, and I still am to a point, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I know who I am, and although I can't completely trust myself, I know every time I don't self abandon, or every time I protect my child, pieces of the self trust will come back.
Absolutely. It's baby steps, 2 steps forward, 1
Absolutely.
step back sometimes, but you got to keep putting your feet 1 foot in front of the other. Sarah, I want
Yeah.
to thank you for your honesty, your courage, and for sharing your story with us today. To our listeners, if Sarah's story resonated with you, please know you are not alone. Until next time, this is the Phoenix Project, turning pain into purpose. Before we close today's episode, I want to remind listeners that if you are navigating life after abuse, coercive control, trafficking, difficult relationships, or major life transitions, support is available. Through Artemis Coaching and Company, I provide trauma-informed wellness coaching, nervous system education, and survivor-led support for women who are rebuilding their lives after difficult experiences. My work focuses on helping women reconnect with themselves, establish safety, strengthen boundaries, and move forward with greater confidence and clarity. You can learn more about Artemis Coaching and Company at www.artemiscoachingco.com. And if today's conversation resonated with you, please know this. What happened to you is not your fault. Your reactions make sense. Your story matters. And no matter how impossible things feel right now, healing and rebuilding are possible. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Phoenix Project, Turning Pain into Purpose. If you found value in today's conversation, please like, follow, subscribe, and leave a review. Those simple actions help us reach more survivors, educate more people about coercive control and abuse, and ensure that these important stories continue to be heard. Please also share this episode with someone who may need to hear it. You can follow the Phoenix Project on your favorite podcast platform and on social media for future episodes, survivor stories, educational content, and conversations focused on healing, awareness, and rebuilding after trauma. Until next time.